Welcome to the Feehery podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my colleagues John Easton and Adam Belmar, and we are joined by our special guest, Mike Viqueria, a well-known television personality, a reporter for NBC News.
NBC News.
And what's the one that you guys do? ITV?
No, I-24,
I-24
is one place that you can find Viqueria, but you know what? He does a lot of great broadcasting, and as you will say later, he is a journalist.
He's a journalist.
Wow.
He worked at NHK.
Japan Broadcasting.
Exactly. And also worked for that famous Al Jazeera.
So de gozaimasu. Hey.
He is a graduate of the University of Maryland and Walter Johnson High School. They're not going to change that name, are they?
They already did. It used to be the Spartans. Now it's the Wildcats. Don't go there.
It should be called the Big Train. He's also the author of You Didn't Get This From Me, a novel about Washington, media, and politics. It doesn't actually say that, it just says media and politics. But I think I helped Mike write this novel just by talking to him all the time.
And
He's
saying,
persistent.
You didn't get this from me.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, yes.
There it is. I just blew you.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Welcome to our podcast, Mike Viqueria.
Thanks. It's great to be alive. And here.
Yeah, thank you. And happy Veterans Day to all you veterans out there. And I hope that everybody celebrates the 99th anniversary of Armistice Day, which is tomorrow at 11 a.m. At the conclusion of the First World War. Sorry, I had a hard time getting it out.
It's okay. 11th hour, 11th day.
11th hour, 11th day.
11th month.
11th month. And tomorrow is Armistice Day. But we celebrate Veterans Day. And so to all your veterans out there, thank you for watching and thank you for all that you've done. Theory 1, less is more. The Roy Moore campaign ran seriously off the rails when a Washington Post story ran detailing that he once tried to date a 14-year-old girl when he was 32 years old. Most of Washington immediately called on Judge Moore, I call him Judge lightly, to step aside as a candidate, but in my view, that doesn't seem too likely. Here's my theory. Roy Moore is guilty as charged, and he should stop his campaign now. But he won't, and the people in Alabama hate the liberal media so much that he might actually win this campaign. I say it's 50-50. Mike, you are a journalist.
That's true.
I'm sure you read this Washington Post story, although you probably didn't follow it because you're not into his politics as much as we are.
Oh, man. I'm immersed in this
You
thing.
are immersed in it.
Yeah.
You wrote a novel about it.
Yeah.
Would this fit into your novel? Would this be a novel's not novel?
As a matter of fact, something like this was foretold in my novel.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You must read it then.
Yeah.
Prescient.
Prescient. I wrote this during recesses in the early 2000s. Amazing how many things came true. Anyway, I don't want to.
So do you think the story is accurate? And do you think that he will win in Alabama, or do you think that he will step aside?
You know, accurate. That's a great question, because when I first heard this, I think I was like on the metro looking at Twitter, and people were talking about it, but in a very oblique way. I hadn't yet read the Washington Post story, and I thought, do they really have the goods? I mean, 1979, really? And then you read the story, and it is reported incredibly in-depth with people on the record, and that makes a huge difference, obviously, with details, with corroborating witnesses. And so, obviously, yeah, Roy Moore's in big trouble, and I think there's no greater testimony to that than the fact that Republicans in Congress say, if true, I mean, they have this caveat, if true, which is kind of a safety catch-all, but still, if true, he should step aside. And so I think it's a reflection of sort of this moment where we are, given everything that's happening and all the controversies and all these revelations and disturbing news we hear about sexual harassment in the higher echelons of society, if you want to call Hollywood the higher echelons of society, and in government as well, that nobody is jumping to his defense, which still might be a function of the fact that he's not really, I mean,
beloved.
Right, they supported Luther Strange in the primary, most of these people that we're talking about. But I think it's a remarkable moment, and I agree with you. I think he's got a better, I'll go even further. I'll say there's a 51-49% chance that he's elected to the Senate seat.
I'm going to go the other way. I think that probably much less than 50% chance. And I say that Mitt Romney actually tweeted something really, really well this morning. He said that innocent until proven guilty is for convictions, not for elections. And I think that he really hit on something. You know, the campaigns I've been part of, I've been a part of these October surprises. I mean, this is definitely a November surprise in the biggest way possible. And I agree that John's right about, you know, the Alabama voters. They don't like Washington. They don't like the liberal media, the establishment media, and they like Trump, you know, for a lot of those reasons. But this transcends a lot of that, I believe. And even I think Alabama voters, even with their disdain for the establishment, will probably take a step back and say, I can't go there.
Yeah, I got an email, Adam Belmar, I was on Hardball last night, and I basically said what I said, right, you know, I think he should step aside, and I think he's guilty. And somebody emailed me from Alabama saying, you are part of the liberal media,
Right.
and Roy Moore is going to win 56-42, and you don't know what the hell you're talking about, but come on down south and hang out with us sometime, you'll understand us better. What do you think, Mr. Belmar?
You know what? I have no idea whether these allegations are true. They've certainly come out of nowhere, and I agree with Mike that they've been well reported at this point, and they've spoken to folks who have wanted to come on the record. This guy has such a long political history in Alabama that one wonders what caused this to happen now. Is it the sexual assault allegations that are just all over the place? Did Harvey Weinstein unleash this flow that has now caught Roy Moore up in it? Or is there something even more sinister there? I honestly don't know. And you talked about the caveat, if true. Obviously, this is just disgusting and reprehensible and nothing that you'd want to have anyone who you know or as a friend, let alone a leader, be involved with. But I won't pretend to understand the politics in Alabama. I will just say that he probably, in my opinion, was a bad candidate before all of this came up, not someone that I was excited to see in the United States Senate. And I will just wait patiently to see how this bears out. But he's not stepping down from this, and he's ready to fight. And so I'm willing to give him at least another round to see where he goes and what he says.
One of the disturbing aspects of this, really, as a journalist, is people have their own version of the truth now.
Yeah.
I mean, Roy Moore can echo the president and say it's fake news, and people will take it at face value.
I think that's right, and I think that's the problem that the media has, is that no one believes it anymore,
Right.
and that's a thing that's overcome. I read the story. I was convinced by it. I'm also convinced that we're in a moment here where women feel that they are empowered to say when they've been mistreated, and they feel like this. You know, if you were a 14-year-old and you had some 32-year-old, you know, hit on you and try to date you, and you didn't want to say anything
Right.
because you were afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're not afraid anymore because you have people who are going out there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think that, and I tend to believe this story. I think that there was so much corroborating evidence. Now, if you're Roy Moore and you're part of the conservative media that's supporting him, you say the timing doesn't work out. That Roy Moore has been through several big campaigns, and this never came out before. But the fact is that there were a lot of rumors about Roy Moore.
Uh-huh.
And
Which, if you read the Post's account of it, that they heard the rumors and they decided to investigate, and that's how
Right.
this all got
Yeah,
started.
yeah. So, John, you have any further thoughts on? I mean, I just think that the problem is we're going to be stuck with Roy Moore because I think he might win.
Well, and I think the way he could win is because of the difficulties of the ballot down there and the difficulties of getting him out of this race. Let's say he even does
Will you
step
elaborate
aside.
on that? Because we now know what can't happen.
Well, I don't know every detail about the ballot rules there, but I am told that he can't now be off the
Right,
ballot.
they can't
So
take
the
him
only-
off the
it's a
ballot.
Lisa
write-in.
Murkowski option.
Exactly.
Right?
It's a
write-in.
it's a
Yeah,
write-in situation where somebody like Luther Strange or somebody with some, that's probably what the party would want to do since he has so much. He's a sitting senator and he has a lot of name recognition. He's been through the primary. They would probably have like a Lisa Murkowski of Alaska plan to try to galvanize that write-in.
Yeah, but I mean, you're right. That's a long shot.
It's a long shot. It's
Yeah.
very tough.
I got a
So-
question for Viqueria. Had you ever heard any rumors like this?
About Roy Moore?
Yeah.
No. I have not.
Okay, so when you say the rumors were out there, what we're just talking about in Alabama, I don't think that in our conversations you
In,
would have heard of this
in,
before.
in Alabama, and that was reported in the Washington Post, but that has been reported in other places that there had been widespread rumors that Moore was, trying to date younger women when he was a younger man, and much younger women than in an inappropriate way. But because this is so corroborated. I mean, this is I think it's a very authentic story.
Well, I want to throw this out there as well. There was another Alabama politician who stood up in an attempt to stand up for Judge Moore and made some comments historically, biblically, about the relationship between Joseph and Mary.
Joseph and Mary, yeah.
It may have been his brother who did that.
Was it really?
I think so.
What an unbelievably stupid comparison.
Well, theoretically, I mean, if you're Catholic like I am, it was a virgin birth.
To be sure, that's part of it.
God. Wait, you didn't tell me we were going to do theology when I came on here. Yeah, but I mean,
We do, you know what? We do everything at the Feehery Theory.
The
So,
Feehery Theory
let's just look at
podcast,
it this
at
way.
AKA
Yeah,
two
we do it
two
all.
Catholics and a
Theology, politics, we do it all.
And cold press.
I mean, you bring up an extreme example, but I mean, the idea that someone would even float that, is that an indication of what people are willing to believe or the lengths they're willing to go to twist logic and in order to justify what has apparently transpired or allegedly transpired, or I should say purportedly transpired? You know, I'm with you. I just think that at this moment in time, in a place like Alabama, as deep red as it is, as culturally conservative as it is, people are either going to refuse to believe it, or they're going to find a way to dismiss it, or they're going to see a conspiracy.
Right, and I think all those are possibilities. And I
agree.
think the other problem for the Democrats is Doug Jones is actually pretty liberal.
Right, and they're not
He's-
going to vote
he's-
for Doug Jones.
they're
So
not gonna-
really, the only hope that Doug Jones has is no viable write-in candidate and incredibly low turnout on
Right,
the part of Republicans.
I think that's right. Theory 2, when it rains, it pours. Republicans were dealt a series of painful losses on Election Day earlier this week. Ed Gillespie lost by 9%. Republicans lost control of the Virginia House of Delegates, and throughout the country, the GOP lost in stunning fashion. My theory, the suburbs said to Donald Trump, "You're fired." And if Republicans don't come up with a suburban strategy that provides some shelter from the coming storm, 2018 will be a tsunami that will carry away the Republican majority. John Easton, what are your thoughts on the election on Tuesday?
Well, I agree with that, and this was a really difficult night for a lot of reasons. I think that with the Ed Gillespie situation, I mean, if you look at what dominated that race in the end, I mean, you had Democrats have an 11-point advantage in the state, and he lost Democrats 97-3. You have moderates; they went for Northam over Gillespie 64-33. And it's just a highly charged political climate right now. And I think that if you don't have some accomplishments at the highest level, then what's happening is the Trump sideshow is going to cannibalize the party.
Well, you know what? One thing, Mike Viqueria, that struck me in all of this, and in Easton brought it up, is that there was this 11-point differential. It is now a blue state. It's not a swing state.
Yeah.
But as you dig into the numbers, one thing I think that you find is that Ed Gillespie actually performed very well with his Republican base in Virginia.
Right. But it was just a motivated Democrat.
Yes,
base,
it was. And I want you to talk about that for a second, because you're familiar with the burgeoning demographics of Northern Virginia.
Right,
which-
and who
yeah.
said, Jerry Falwell Jr. said that what we need to do is cede Northern Virginia back to
I'm
back
not
to
sure
the
what
District
that
of
means.
Columbia, yeah, which would probably make Ed Gillespie ineligible to run for governor in Virginia. But in any event, yeah, I'm not completely convinced this is the harbinger. This is like the tsunami that's going to,
Yeah, neither
the
am I.
beginning of, the tremor that generates the tsunami that subsumes
Although the
everything
liberal
on
media
land.
has decided that this is
Damn liberal media.
God.
I mean, I will say this.
But because Trump's not on the ballot,
Right.
right? The jury is out on accomplishments,
Right.
whether or not they get tax reform, whether they'll trumpet and, hold up, Trump will trumpet. Ed Gillespie was not, I hate to buy into, the spin coming from the White House, but there is a kernel of truth to the fact that he is not a Trumpist.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
not.
Oh,
he's
yeah, I
not
think
a
there's
Trumpist.
more truth to it than a kernel.
Yeah.
He's not a Trumpist.
Never has been.
Never has been. And I agree with all what you're saying. This is not the end of the Republican majority quite yet. But I will say that women voters in the suburbs are so angry that this could repeat itself unless Republicans start repairing the damage. And I know that just talking to people close to my family, like my wife.
Yeah.
And so this is a problem. I would also want to say that we have joined in the studio today
Oh, yeah?
Isabel and Ava Easton, and I wanted to say hi to them. Hi, ladies. Hi. And Ava ran for class president at St. Peter's, and so she's a very practiced politician.
And she won.
And she won, yeah.
Wow.
And Isabel, what are you, treasurer? Secretary, okay. And she's secretary. So I just want to mention that, and you're very proud dad, right?
Well, sure, and I mean, you know, it's all politics here.
You know, the producer in me wants to beckon them right over here to pray the president would. Girls, where are you? Come on up here right now. We don't have a lot of time, but come on up here. Stand by your dad.
Real quick.
I think it's important. Thank you for not tripping on these wires, but just to let you know, we do have these beautiful Easton girls right here in the
Fantastic.
studio.
We have a studio audience. It's true.
Yeah.
Anything you want to share with the collected Facebook crowd?
Hey guys.
What was your platform? Did you have a political platform that you ran on?
Vote for Isabel. She's the right choice because I'm secretary.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there you go.
Ava, you won as president. What was your platform?
Oh, I said we would have more fundraisers because we didn't do a lot of them last year.
And we're gonna try to bring a nationals player to St. Peter's School.
See, that'll get the base out for you.
All right, girls, you're dismissed.
There you girls. You can.
I have an Ava at home, too. Good to see you.
Mr. Feehery, can I ask you to clarify one thing? When you talk about repair the damage, can you help unpack that? Because to me, I really feel like repairing the damage is let's get some agenda items done. Let's move forward on the things that the president campaigned on where there is unanimity. Are you talking about that or something bigger?
Well, what I'm talking about is they have to find things that the voters care about in the suburbs. From my perspective, one of the things that they could do is have President Trump go. I mean, I thought Gillespie could have had President Trump join Ed Gillespie on 66 and say, we have a plan to expand 66 to get rid of all this traffic. That would have been a great way to get the president on your side. Not talk about Confederate monuments, just talk about how you're going to fix roads and bridges. Because that is something that no matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or what you are, people like that. And if you can be a guy who can fix things as opposed to the nonsense that they portrayed on Confederates, you didn't need it. You know, take a knee, if you take a knee or take a stand or whatever that was. I mean, come on, let's focus on issues that people really care about.
Well, and to your point, John, the biggest issue of the race ended up being healthcare, which is interesting because, and not in a good way for Republicans, because over the last 4 election cycles, it's been Obamacare and it's been railing against Obamacare. That was a comfort zone for Republicans.
Right.
This time around, Obamacare, I mean, we have the majority in national government. So what happens is it's the major issue, but on the wrong side, because now it's not our comfort zone to fix it. But tax reform is, which is where we could have a win.
And I do think that they are going to get tax reform done. I think it's going to be good for us, for Republicans, not because the rank and file voters are necessarily going to love it, but because it's actually going to juice the economy, and people a juiced economy where people have higher wages typically is very good for politicians.
Do you have a reaction to that thought?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, look at Bill Clinton in '93. You know, a major tax overhaul. He raised taxes in many respects, cut them in other respects. Largest peacetime economic expansion, or longest peacetime economic expansion in history. I think, really, I'm not an economist, but since you are going into that lane, I think that the trouble that Republicans have had is the ideological straitjacket that they have worn.
Yeah.
And, you know, to believe in trickle down or the Laffer curve or however, you know, whatever you adhere to in terms of your economic theory, you gotta loosen that up a little bit.
And I think they are in this tax bill.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of well-heeled lobbyists in this town are not happy about this tax bill because it doesn't cut taxes enough or at all for wealthy people.
Right.
But it does. This tax package is going to be really good for most middle-income Americans.
I've had this discussion a lot of times recently. The Democratic leadership, and if the roles are reversed, it would be the Republican leadership. You can give them the sun, the moon, and the stars of what they're asking for. They're still not going to support it. That's not why they're there.
Right.
You know, they're going to find any reason they can to rally their troops to whip their votes against it.
Right.
Tax reform is giving people something, as opposed to Obamacare reform, which is taking something away.
Right, I think that's right.
And so and from a political sense, it's much easier, and it's much easier to pick off Democrats because, look, we talk about the height camps and the mansions and the testers and everybody who's up. It's true.
Right. And
I mean, they're going to be tempted.
But I do think, and John knows this better than I do, and I think talking to the Senate Republican leadership, they firmly believe that if they get 50 votes for this thing, they'll get one more with Pence, and then they'll get about 7 more with the Democrats who are all in those red states who say, screw it, I'm going to vote for this thing because
Right, I'm not going to be, if
Because
it's
it's
going to
passing.
pass, yeah.
Because it's
yeah,
passing. It's
yeah.
going to pass anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in front of that parade.
Theory 3, out of sight, out of mind. President Trump is touring Asia this week. He played golf with Shinzo Abe in Japan. He talked about his golf course in a speech in South Korea. And then he teed off against American trade policies while in China. You see how I did that?
I did. I like that.
Wow.
All in all, it has been a very good trip for him, but nobody here seems to care.
You stumbled a couple times. You might want to take a mulligan on
I think I stumbled before that. My theory, even though Mr. Trump has been out of the news mostly, and that is a good thing for him, he looks somewhat presidential. He's being warmly received by friends and competitors alike in Asia, and that's a good thing. Adam, you've been following this trip. Has this trip been good for President Trump?
Yes, it has been good for President Trump. I spent a couple of years producing foreign travel for President George W. Bush. The optics matter, and this is a president for whom optics matter a lot. It came at sort of an odd political time for the president to be out of the country, but at the same time, I think he's allowed himself to be insulated. He's cut down on the cadence of tweets, and everywhere he's gone, he's received a warm reception. He tried to do something bold at the DMZ that didn't work out terribly well because of the weather. But everywhere he's gone, I think I've seen a very confident presidential role that he's played. And you know what? He's got the First Lady with him, and that means a lot. The news has been good. The speeches have been strong, from my opinion. And overall, I think being away and getting involved in these 5 country trips were very, very positive for the country and for the president.
Mike Viqueria, you used to do Japanese television.
That's right.
That
So
was your
gozaimasu
thing.
ne. Hi.
All right.
Have you been following this trip?
Oh, yeah.
And what do you think?
I agree with everything that was just said. They haven't had any major stumbles. I think the press covering the trip, those of us in the press, get way too carried away with issues that affect us and nobody else cares about. He didn't take questions in China. It broke precedent going back to Bush 41, standing next to the Chinese president. The Chinese always insist.
Right, typically each leader will take 2 questions.
And there's always a huge fight, and there's usually a melee thrown in at the photo ops with the Chinese officials fighting the American
Over access.
Literally fighting and
Right.
pushing and shoving. Trump didn't do any of that. He acquiesced to everything that they want to do in terms of the choreography, in terms of the access, which is, I believe, as a journalist, I wrote a whole novel on these themes, is really important. It's important for democracy. Nobody else cares, right? As a snapshot, as one
And
incident.
certainly Trump doesn't care. It's not like he's
Yeah.
begging to take
Yeah.
more questions from the media, the fake news media.
But I think in a larger sense, it's a double-edged sword for him. I mean, his base doesn't. I mean, and he plays to his base. Obviously, his base is everything to him. They don't want to. They don't care. They couldn't identify President Xi Jinping. They don't know. He's in Da Nang, Vietnam. Da Nang, Vietnam means one thing to most Americans
Yes, it does.
over the age of 40,
right.
anyway.
Yeah.
And he's going to go talk to Duterte, who carries out
brutal dictator.
extrajudicial, and
and he's pals with.
Yeah, and who he's staying an extra day to be with for the East Asia Security Summit. So, to the extent that people are paying attention, he looks presidential, but then there's all this other stuff going on around
Can
it.
I add something
I
back
think
into
it's
what
kind of
Mike's
a
just said?
wash. Yeah.
One of the things, if you are a supporter of this president in particular, the White House has done a fantastic job over the last 7 or 8 days, wrapping up the day's events and pushing affirmatively out to the White House YouTube audience really well-crafted videos. Now, Barack Obama and his team did this a lot.
Right.
They did it every week. The Trump folks have quietly picked it up. And if you are just seeing it through that lens, which the RNC has also been echoing, you see a very presidential litany of images and conduct by the commander-in-chief. I think they've done a great job in helping him along with this trip, and it hasn't received any coverage. But people who are,
Well, because it's the expectation.
it is.
I mean, the expectation
have to prove
in
it,
the
too.
pre-Trump world that American president's going to go overseas and conduct himself with decorum and dignity, and is going to represent the country, in a way that is not going to embarrass us. So he's met the bar. It's a fairly low bar, but
Yeah.
what has he done that's memorable?
I think he's done a couple things that are memorable, and I think that he's done a good job over there. And I think that for someone who doesn't have any foreign policy experience, he has met a low bar, but he exceeded it pretty well. And his last trip, I thought, to Europe was actually pretty good as well.
Yeah.
John Easton.
Yeah, I think that, remember how the trip started. It was at Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And I know that that's also not a high bar either. You go, you lay your wreath, but it was strong, and I think it reassures
I guess in
Americans.
the context of never seeing Trump perform this way.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also think that to Adam's point, very well planned, and I think it was well chosen where they went. And he's been throwing big bouquets to President Xi. I mean, there's just I don't think there's really much of an upside for him challenging the president of China, outright and making waves that way. I think he's become more presidential in that sense. But going to our big allies in Southeast Asia, to South Korea, trying to get to the DMZ. Japan, Vietnam. I think these are all important.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think a lot of Americans don't know much about this trip, but the few things they see, I think they say, he should
think
be there.
some of my colleagues have sort of stepped in it on this trip. Minor incidences like he dumped the koi food in
Yeah,
the
that
pond,
turned into like an internet
and everybody
thing.
tried to make it. Oh, look at Trump just dying. He doesn't care. It turned out to be a completely
When Abe did the same thing.
fake story.
Fake story.
It's just
Fake news.
unfortunately the way everybody has a predetermined sort of, I'm not going to say narrative because that's a ridiculously overused phrase now, but
We
you
use
have to be,
we use that phrase a lot here.
you have to be careful. You can't just play into some pre-existing mindset or expectation. And then the other day when all the pearl clutching about how he praised China for taking advantage of the openings that the United States has left them in the areas of trade, I didn't find that comment to be that outrageous. I didn't understand.
I thought it was largely accurate, actually.
I didn't understand all the hand wringing and pearl clutching on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Any other thoughts on the Asia trip? All right, Adam Belmar, we're going to ask you, what are you buying or selling today?
Well, the weather has turned. It's getting colder, and I am buying ice melt. Why? Because the very steep steps at EFB are going to be the death of me, and I'm going to try and get ahead of the upcoming wet, cold, freezing
Go down
winter.
to Frager's, get yourself a rake and a.
Yeah, so I'm buying ice melt. I suggest you do the same.
Mike Viqueria, what are you buying or selling?
I'm buying tax reform. I think it's going to pass in a larger sense. And I'm also buying my novel. You didn't get this from me. A prescient.
That would have
look
been a really good buy, actually.
at,
I'm
Where
buying
do you
it.
get the novel?
on Amazon.
There you go.
Yeah. The heroine, Loretta Jean Polk, a member of Congress who was a victim of sexual harassment in her career, overcame it and leads an insurrection in a very unlikely way with a reporter who's sort of compromised, a TV reporter who's at the end of his rope and the end of his career, desperate for a scoop.
John Easton, what are you buying or selling today?
I am going to sell. We rarely sell at this table.
Yes.
But I'm going to sell. And on a serious note, violence against politicians, violence against public officials. I think, and this isn't really, I'm not really talking about that shooting in the Alexandria of Majority Whip Scalise and the others, which was just another level, which I'm not going to touch. I'm talking about the Senator Rand Paul incident, which we have not addressed yet, but this is a crazy story in this town right now, and I'm sure crazy in Senator Rand Paul's neighborhood. But a lot is starting to come out from his neighbors and how this is just.
Can you share? Because I haven't heard the update.
The one thing I want to share is this narrative that's being built that this is a fight over leaves and
pumpkins.
yard debris and pumpkins.
Apparently he sells pumpkins. Or
He grows pumpkins. Yeah, but everybody said this is a good neighbor. It doesn't matter whether he's a good neighbor or not. I mean, first of all, you don't attack your neighbor. I mean, you don't impose physical violence on your neighbor. This guy's a United States senator. I don't care if it's a county commissioner, city councilman, on the Board of Education. You do not inflict violence on our public officials. I think it's atrocious. And if this starts happening more and more, you could almost call it a little bit of a trend, which would be probably the worst thing to happen to American democracy in modern history.
Right. You could say it's an isolated incident, dispute between neighbors, but obviously the neighbor knows he's a United States senator.
That's exactly
You
right.
think. All right, so I am going to be selling Steve Bannon. Bannon, who endorsed Roy Moore, is now stuck with him, and he's stuck with a bunch of other kooky candidates like Kelly Ward in Arizona. I think that the fact that Bob Mercer decided to resign from his board and stop giving money to Steve Bannon is a good thing. Steve Bannon is going down the tubes, baby. He's no longer the big kahuna, and I think that I would sell him. And I'm going to also offer a buy. I'm going to buy some more stock of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They play Miami tomorrow.
Oh,
You
yeah.
dollar cost averaging on the.
Yeah, Miami's back, huh?
Well-
Makes Chuck Todd happy, my friend Chuck Todd.
Chuck
yeah.
Todd, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll sell Chuck Todd.
Oh, now.
Hey, I didn't laugh at that. For the record.
Miami. Any other thoughts?
No.
So I will make one last thing. Thanks to our friends at Commonwealth Joe, cold pressed coffee. This is coffee, not beer. I wish it was beer.
No, it's just not late enough in the
That's
day.
what, hey, I'm going to buy a Guinness when I get out of here. That reminds me.
I also recommend that you buy this novel. You Didn't Get This From Me by our good friend Mike Viqueria. Mike Viqueria, thank you for joining
All
us
right, had a
at
great
the
time.
Feehery podcast, brought to you by EFB. EFB means
Excellent for business.
Yeah, baby.